So I think we're live. Yes, we're live. I'm here with my new friend Steven. Steven, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Nice to meet you. You're a strapping young man.
Thank you.
You're done up so nicely. What are you going to a wedding or something? Or
I went to a wedding yesterday, but I just got finished with a later church service here in Chicago. Um,
ah,
so
yeah.
still in the building, actually. Most people have left, but that's why I'm dressed up.
Well, it's nice and quiet there.
Yes,
But the LDS or the Mormons, as I call them, they're always presentable, look nice, and smiling, and a lot of them have like blue eyes or bright eyes. You have darker eyes.
that's true. I have darker eyes. Yeah, I think it's the a lot of Scandinavian influence. So if you travel to Utah, you'll see a lot more blonde hair, blue eye.
Yeah. Do you
Um,
know any, before we get into the biographical stuff, do you know any ethnic minorities, visible minorities in the LDS community?
yeah, I mean, I grew up with friends, whether heritage from South America, Taiwan. I had only, I would say, when I grew up, only one close friend that was black. I later served my mission in West Africa, so
Ah,
I became, maybe more culturally familiar with other parts of the world. Also, Chicago's a little bit more like that. Utah's a little less diverse, but definitely my local friend group. We had a lot of various across the spectrum. So
oh, that's interesting. That's cool. So, not that it's important, it doesn't really matter, but it's
sure,
interesting
yeah.
because everyone I've met that's LDS has been like me, very white. Not that there's anything wrong
It
with
is
being
more
white
typical.
either.
It is more typical, at least in the U.S.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So before we get into general chit chat, I want you to tell us about your journey. I would imagine you were probably raised in the LDS, and but if there's anything interesting along your journey between childhood and today, just paint a little picture for us, okay?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to give you a quick brief overview. I did grow up in the LDS Church. I think from the outside perspective, it would have looked like a really like standard family, but I think from the inside, it wasn't as much like that. We had a very heavy focus on theology growing up from my dad's culture. My dad's family culture was maybe from one perspective might be looked at as very zealous, maybe overzealous um, from one perspective. But then you had my mom, who was a convert. Uh, you know, half of her siblings weren't really religious, but it just embodied I guess, the feeling of Christianity, a very loving, kind person. And so, on one hand, I would say that my dad's theology more aligned with the concept of justice, and I feel like my mom's overarching feeling and what I was raised in was more mercy. And I think that led me as I think my personality and temperament, I'm a little bit more just theologically oriented and philosophically oriented by temperament. And that kind of led me on a lifelong journey to try to reconcile what seemed to be these two truths of my parents. Even though it's within the LDS faith, the overarching theology didn't seem to be able to reconcile in its completeness. And so a lot of my life has been spent trying to look at the broader picture, whether metaphysically, if you want to go that far, or theologically speaking, how these things reconcile, that justice and mercy can, totally exist and come in harmony. And so I did grow up in the LDS faith. I never fell away from that, although I've had a lot of friends who have. And I went on a mission in West Africa, I think I said, in the Ivory Coast first. I went to Ghana for most of my mission because the civil war broke out in Ivory Coast while I was there. Had to escape.
Oh.
Whole other big story. That was eye opening as a 19, almost 20-year-old.
How old are
Um,
you today?
38.
Okay, you look young.
Yeah, I do look young. I've always been told I look younger than I am. Um, so post mission, I was a lot of the traditional story at BYU. If you've talked to other LDS
Brigham
people,
Young.
Brigham Young University. Um, I did get married at the end of my time there. Had two kids.
Ah,
Moved out to Chicago, and that's kind of where my story is maybe a little more divergent from the standard story.
ah.
Um, my wife kind of had a faith crisis slash life crisis,
Oh,
wanted to divorce.
oh,
So I went through a divorce back in, well, that started in 2014. It was really rough, long 2 years trying to figure out everything. It finalized in 2016. Um, and then because of the pandemic, that was actually brought me back to Utah. I met somebody else. And I remarried in 2021 to somebody from the south of France.
ah,
Her parents are Spanish, so she's kind of Spanish slash French.
wow, she sounds beautiful.
Yeah, she is. um, and I guess that's a Catholic thing too. Like, divorce is not looked highly upon in our culture. It's not really seen as acceptable. I tried to avoid that at all costs, but um, you can't choose it alone. Um, so uh, it ended up landing in a really good situation. My wife is current wife. She's really great. The kids, I thought their lives would be permanently damaged, but they have shown remarkable spiritual strength and character. They were, so young when it happened. When it started, they were like 1 and 3 years old.
Oh,
They're now just going to be turning 10 and 12 soon. Um, Brilliant, great kids, and our situation now, we're living in Utah, as well as my ex-wife. We're all back in Utah,
okay.
and things are going well. So
Ah,
that's the background.
yeah, wow, there's a lot to dig into there. I guess first with the sort of family stuff,
Sure.
is the ex-wife, is she atheist, agnostic? What is she?
I think somewhere in between those, and she doesn't open that up very much to me. Um, but she still believed in God when we split up, but I think that is no longer the case, is my
Oh,
understanding.
okay. You have some kind of custody sharing thing or
Yeah, we share 50-50 with the kids.
50/50? Is that the best case scenario for most divorced people? 50/50, is that the best or?
I think so, yeah. Um, and it wasn't. She didn't want that at the beginning, and
Mhm.
I fought for that, and I think now looking back, she really appreciates that that's where it landed.
Mhm.
Um, I think we've been able to work well together as the time has gone on, and work out the shared arrangement. So
That's rough stuff. Yeah, that's really difficult. So, the new wife, she's LDS, I would imagine.
yeah, she is. Yeah,
And she was already
she was. Yeah, she
raised
grew
that
up
way?
in the church. Her
Oh,
parents were both converts in the south of France.
oh,
She grew up LDS. Some of her siblings are LDS, some are not.
oh, okay.
Um, um, I think her siblings who are not, I don't know much about their specific faith. I don't think they're very religious.
Oh, okay.
They're very good, kind people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Have you been to France?
Yeah.
Wow. Which towns or cities?
Well, we traveled around. Actually, this summer we spent some time, both in Paris, but up near Belgium and like Lille. Went through Normandy on the west, kind of the west coast coming down. But eventually spent a lot of time down in the south where my wife's from. She's the town that's closest to her is Pepignon.
Okay.
It's kind of the Mediterranean side near the border of Spain. And so we spent a lot of
Oh,
time around that area and even
beautiful.
going down a little bit into Spain and Barcelona and that type of thing. So
Ah, that's really nice. Nice.
yeah.
It's one of the best places in the world, south of
Yeah.
France.
The dream would be to get like a second home out there and have like a summer home in the south of France.
Yeah, amazing. Wow. And the food is good. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yes. Very good.
Mediterranean fruits and vegetables are full of flavor, full of flavor,
Yes.
nutrients. It's unbelievable, unbelievable. My wife's Greek, and she spent time in the south of France.
Ah,
She went to school there
okay.
for a term semester or whatever. But yeah, the Mediterranean. I mean, I lived in Greece with. Well, I went there before meeting my wife, and then I met her in Canada. We went for a honeymoon to Greece, and partly Greece, partly my homeland, which is the British Isles,
Ah,
England and Scotland. I mean, we didn't make it over to Ireland, but yeah, the Mediterranean. Wow, the sun. It's so
yeah.
powerful. The sun is so powerful. It's
Yeah.
nice. We
Oh, that's
never
cool.
saw a cloud. We lived on an island, Mykonos, and I never saw a cloud.
Yeah,
I never saw a cloud.
yeah.
I mean,
That's
we didn't always live on the island of Mykonos, but when we did, it was like, I don't know how many months we spent there, 8 months or whatever it was, but we never saw a cloud.
wow.
It's like amazing.
That is amazing. And
Uh,
we've both been wanting to go to Greece actually. We
yeah.
haven't made it yet, but that is definitely in the plan.
Yeah, amazing. So, I want to talk a little bit about your mom and your dad. Forgive
Sure.
me if I missed it, but are they still around? And
Yeah, they're still around. So that they're. Um, I have had one death in the family actually post my divorce. My youngest brother
oh yeah,
passed away unexpectedly when he was 20 years old, and that
wow,
was another huge blow to the family. I think my dad is still kind of reeling from that even to this day. I mean, it was 6 years ago at this point.
mm,
Um, yeah, so
wow,
that was a big deal. I'm the oldest of. He was the fourth child. He was the youngest, and
oh
so we were six together. Yeah,
wow, that's really traumatizing. Yeah,
yeah.
horrible. So we'll be praying for him. But the whole justice and mercy thing, that's something that we all struggle with.
Hmm.
Um, to understand how to reconcile those, and um, another one is grace. Grace and free will, like God's sovereignty and free will.
Hmm.
Now, I do want to be honest with you right up front. Like, I mean, I do have a bone to pick with LDS because of the metaphysics.
Okay.
It's like your conception of God to me is wrong.
Foreign,
It's wrong. It's wrong.
foreign.
It's wrong. Okay, it's wrong.
Okay.
So that's a very strong pet peeve I have with your worldview. I just want to be upfront with you, but I love and respect you, and we can still have a
Oh yeah,
nice conversation. But
yeah.
if you're not worshiping the same God, you're not a monotheist, much less a Christian. So I know you refer to yourselves as Christians because you value Christ, but your conception, your metaphysics behind the God man is so different. That I'm a bit of a stickler when it comes to these metaphysical categories. Okay, so just so you
Interesting.
know that
Yeah, yeah,
it's not the first
yeah.
time you've heard this, probably.
No, no. But it'd be interesting for us to talk about it because
Yeah.
if we go into my particular worldview, because the LDS faith might be a bit unique in this sense among the Christian world in that it's very intentionally not a creedal faith,
Okay.
and so sometimes it's hard. I mean, probably most LDS people, like probably most religious people, are not like thinking into metaphysics and they're not
Yeah.
going that deep, right? There's
Yeah.
the standard narrative, but I think there's a lot of wiggle room within the LDS faith
Oh.
because it's not creedal
Oh.
to where if you do go into people that are thinking more deeply about these things, you what actually people believe in the deeper parts might look very different between people because
Oh.
it is very flexible like that.
Like Hinduism. Some say that some Hindus are actually monotheistic. They believe in the same God that I do, and some say no, they're polytheistic, and it's nothing to do with monotheism at all.
Yeah.
But they say that the more educated and wise ones, sophisticated ones, actually understand the metaphysics of the uncaused first cause. Because for me, I was atheist for 25 years. I
Mhm.
grew up Protestant Christian, and I lost my faith at 14. 25 years of atheism. And then through studying philosophy, I came to understand the uncaused first cause, like that than which nothing
Mm,
greater can be conceived.
sure.
And I had my conversion experience, and I said to myself, well, what are the monotheistic religions? There's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I hated Christianity. Just that was just a hatred that I had as an atheist. So I said, well, I can't be Christian because I hate it, and I can't be Jewish because I'm not Jewish. And so I guess I'm a default Muslim, but I didn't believe in Muhammad or the Quran, obviously. But
Mhm.
I was just sort of like a generic monotheist. And then, long story short, I ended up some books fell into my hands. It softened my attitude towards Christ and His church, and I became Christian. So all of this to say that I have a philosophical approach that brought me to. It was my love of truth that brought me to God,
Yeah.
and it's the God of classical theism, the God of monotheism. So just so you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, yeah, that's very good. I think that's the most important thing is even the particulars. Like in my mind, the particulars of what somebody believes is I mean, you might not see the same way, but is less important to me than somebody's integrity towards the truth, like the trying to seek the truth at all costs wherever that makes you land, instead of trying to pigeonhole into one particular thing. Take it where the evidence really leads you, and and I believe the truth will bear you out in the end. Whatever it looks like along the path, where that takes you down. I think the truth in the heart of somebody is the most important part of that journey to back to God.
Yeah. Just another little nuance to add in so that you can understand where I'm coming from and we can have a dialogue.
Sure.
I took a leap of faith into Christianity. I took a leap of faith. There are
Mm-hmm.
beliefs that I have which I cannot prove to the atheist. Okay?
Sure.
But that leap of faith was based on a foundation which is provable, which is God. God, we can know that God exists. And it's actually a dogma, an infallible truth of my Catholic faith in this book, among other books, that we can know the existence of God with reason, without recourse to faith. We can know that God exists. Now, it's also a dogma that scientific or philosophical knowledge about the existence of God is not sufficient, because Satan knows that God exists, but he's not worshiping God. So we need to worship God. We need to have faith in God. We need to take a leap of faith. So that's another aspect of religion. It's not just like I know with my head knowledge that God exists and I appreciate Him in an intellectual way. There has to be the heart. There has to be the commitment. It's a romantic relationship. It's a love. It's a love. I am the bride of Christ. I'm in a romantic relationship with Christ in a mystical way, and
Mm-hmm.
because the church is the bride of Christ. So there's
Yes.
a romantic element. There's also a father-son thing. I'm the son of the God the Father. So there are all these family relations. Jesus is my
Yeah.
brother. There are all these family relations, and we shouldn't take them too literally. They're analogs, or they're not to be taken too literally. But
Sure.
the ultimate reality of the Holy Family, the way that we Catholics see it, is there's Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. They're a family, and the families that we have on earth, like your family, for example, you have parents and children.
Yeah.
That's a shadow of the ultimate reality, which is to be found in God.
Mm-hmm.
And because God became incarnate, there's actually a physical Holy Family with the God Man and his bride, and not his bride, excuse me, his mother and his father.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a kind of an analog, like a lot of LDS would really resonate with that, because there's a scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants, which is I guess Revelation specifically through Joseph Smith, that that's unique to the LDS Church, but it says, speaking of the afterlife, the same sociality that exists here will exist there, only coupled with eternal glory. So kind of that same idea that the here is kind of a shadow of the divine and things to come.
Yeah, but you remain married after, in the next life, right? You remain married or no?
That's right. Yeah, we do believe in eternal marriage. Yeah,
Yeah, we don't have that.
yeah.
Unfortunately, well, fortunately, I don't know. God knows, but I'm kind of
Well,
jealous. So that's one
again,
thing I'm jealous of with you guys.
yeah, yeah. It is a nice part of the theology to, I think, to look to that eternal state. Um, yeah, I think that is one thing that separates LDS theology from a lot of theologies.
I've interviewed a few LDS now. One of them was a bit controversial because he was explicitly and openly, unabashedly a transhumanist, and it fits well with the LDS worldview, I think, because there's this sort of evolution where you become gods and these sorts of things. So he believed that it's possible in theory, and you can go back and watch this episode if you don't believe me. He
Sure,
believed that
yeah.
it was possible in theory that another being could surpass or supplant God the Father, your God the Father, because we're in movement, we're in change, and there's growth and perfection. And so he thought it was theoretically possible, although he made a point to say that he doesn't think it's going to happen. Okay, but just to admit that it's theoretically possible, I thought was interesting. And some of the LDS I've talked to have been a bit shocked by his statement.
That's definitely not a standard view. Like I said, it's not that, like, those deeper realms are not creedal, so you'll find a lot of different opinions that crop up maybe like that. But that's definitely not a standard view.
So what, have you thought deeply about the metaphysics of the LDS worldview? And can you just
Yeah.
sort of paint a picture? Like, because I have, in my Christian point of view, it's like there's God, and then he created creation. He didn't have to do that, but he did. And because creation is spatio-temporal, there's a first moment and there's a last moment. When Christ comes, there'll be a last moment, and everything in between is all of space-time.
Mm,
But you don't seem to have that story. You have a different story. Can you just sort of
that's
give the Cole's Notes version of that story?
Yeah, so I could tell you what maybe the standard LDS belief versus like where my own thoughts have
Okay.
maybe
Okay.
expanded off of that.
Yeah.
Maybe starting with kind of the standard narrative is, we believe in a premortal world where people existed in spirit form um, before being embodied in a physical body coming here to Earth. Um, the exact nature of that is it's not fleshed out very well, I would say. Um, Although Joseph Smith did teach that spirits are intelligence, he used those terms interchangeably, and that they were co-eternal with God. So that is something that might be a sticking point for a lot of Christians, to say they were co-eternal, and in some documentations of that sermon even said co-equal with God Himself. So those are pretty strong words that most leaders of the church have since kind of either backed away from or don't believe that that's true that he said that. Um, so there was this idea that developed that pre being a spirit body, that there was some sort of intelligence that existed out of a spirit. But I don't think that's very tenable when you look into our scriptures, including all of Christianity's scriptures. This idea was, I think, kind of made up to try to reconcile. It was just bad theology in my mind. But you'll find a lot of LDS people when they speak of pre-embodied spirits, they think that we're eternal because it came from some sort of thing called intelligence that wasn't actually conscious. So that is probably the most common worldview. Most people won't even have thought that far, but if they have, that's kind of what they'll think. Um, Contrary to actually what Joseph Smith was teaching explicitly at the end of his life, which is that spirits and intelligence are interchangeable and that they are co-eternal with God Himself. Um, so, uh, Going back to the standard narrative, after death, I think it's pretty similar to Catholic belief. We believe in a spirit world before the final days of resurrection. Um, because LDS have work for the dead, it might be analogous to some things in the Catholic Church, with purgatory and
Yeah.
hoping for people to eventually find their way to heaven. I think it's a very similar view. And then post-resurrection, something that maybe distinguishes us between other Christian faiths is we believe in a variety of degrees in heaven.
We'd believe that too.
So,
Yeah.
oh, you do too. Okay. So,
And hell.
and hell. Okay, so degrees of hell as well. So
Yeah.
it kind of like, I guess, Dante's Inferno, kind of the idea of
Yeah, I don't know how orthodox he was, but he certainly got that part right, that there are degrees. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of a cartoon image of it, but
sure,
you know,
probably seen more as allegorical of the
yeah,
different levels of rather than physical
yeah, and we shouldn't take too literally
reality.
who he placed where either. That's like
Right.
we're not
Then that
allowed. We're really not. We shouldn't really speculate about that. You know,
yeah, and that's totally fair. Um,
we're
so yeah,
actually
different.
forbidden to say that anyone's in hell. I think the one exception might be Judas, who betrayed our Lord, but even
Okay.
there, we're kind of just like,
You don't want to give that final judgment. Leave that to
yeah, yeah, yeah,
type of thing.
yeah, yeah,
And I think it's really similar in the LDS faith too. It's a very Joseph Smith himself is kind of the founder of what we see as a restoration to original Christianity. He was a very universalist thinker, I
oh,
think.
really? Oh,
Yeah,
oh,
by nature, and that a lot of people when he was first coming out with even these ideas of degrees of heaven, um, didn't like the fact that there wasn't such a clear division between there's just heaven and hell. But it's very clear in his progression in his thinking and revelations that he was always trying to find how God's love could reach everybody, and ultimately try to give them as much as conceivably possible. And so I would say, from my own personal standpoint, I followed that line of thinking. The more I've gotten older, the more I've leaned towards a more universalist worldview.
Okay.
And then from a more metaphysical level, um, I would describe myself as an idealist.
Okay.
Um, so most, I would say, LDS people in general are monists, whether they know what that word means or not. They do believe that spirit and the material world are ultimately one substance.
Yeah.
But they usually think of that in terms of being material,
Right.
although in the end it's just semantics if it's one thing.
Yeah.
But so I've taken it from the other angle, and I view it as like intelligence itself is the source of all things. Everything is ultimately intelligence. And in that sense, now going beyond what's maybe the typical LDS theology, I would say, yeah, on one view of God, like we do believe God the Father and Mother. That's another difference.
Yeah.
Um, are individuals, but I would say that our um, something that's maybe more close in my thinking to uh, your description of God. It's the first cause, unmoved mover, is what I would see as my thinking is a little bit more pantheistic, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I would say collectively, um, all of us are part of this united one intelligence that is this, that is part of this unmoved mover, this first cause. And so, although there are embodied individuals that have progressed, that we see like a literal being as a father and mother, operating in that sphere and continuing in that sphere, I would say, even in Joseph Smith's thinking, us being co-eternal and co-equal with God, that we are all part of this eternal one intelligence that manifest, actualized into reality and instantaneously. If we want to look at it like that, I think space and time are an experience, but they're derivative. They're not fundamental. They're the experience of intelligence, but I think space and time exist simultaneously um, and eternally. So I think this universe had this particular universe, had a beginning and an end. Will have an end. In the sense of experience, we have a space and time that exists, and I think there was something akin to the Big Bang that set this setting for us. But I think it's much a part of a much larger system that intertwines with each other in an infinite variety into one great whole that, instantaneous. If you want to think of it from a physics perspective, you could think of it as one giant wave function that collapsed instantaneously into all of actualized reality.
Well, yeah, I'm liking your version of LDS a lot better than the average LDS for sure, for sure, for sure, for sure. What I'm wondering is if you have looked into the philosophies of the East. I mentioned Hinduism, Buddhism, because
Yeah.
I should mention to you that I was a hard solipsist at one point before my conversion to God. I thought I was God. I thought I was the disembodied mind, and everything was just because I was so lost down the rabbit hole of philosophy that I wanted to find the truth, and I wanted to doubt everything that was subject to doubt, everything that could be doubted. And that's what Descartes' project was too, doubt everything that could be doubted.
Yeah.
So this radical doubt, as it's called, led me to, I think, therefore I am. It's the only thing I can know with certainty. I can't trust my sense perception, so there's no test possible for
Mm-hmm.
a physical reality. So I
Yep.
was left being a disembodied mind, and so that's the ultimate form of idealism right there. I mean, really. Um, and so I'm wondering, to me now, since having found God and I understand that I'm a real material being, and Christianity gives me everything that I need to know about creation, but there's still that. I'm just wondering what in
Yeah.
hindsight, I started comparing what I went through with my hard solipsism with Buddhism, where everything's illusion. This is just illusion, and you and I are not two beings, right? We
Yeah.
are God having a dream that we're two beings.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you've thought about that.
I have. Unintentionally, my thinking started going down the line of a lot of Eastern thought. And so it's not that I saw Eastern thought out and then, oh, that's what they think, and then incorporated it into my own thinking. I started coming up with a lot of similar theology and realized, whoa, they started saying a lot of those same things long before I even knew they had been talking about these things.
Mm.
Um, so I think there's a lot of truth in Buddhist and Hindu thinking, um, especially in regards to like a high level picture of maybe a unified consciousness. But what I would say is, in my mind, at least currently, I still think that within we are all one, but I don't think we ever lose our identity. And so while we are unified, it might almost sound very Trinitarian, but
Yeah.
extended to everyone. Um, that we are individual beings forever, um, in unity. And so we'll never, like, it's not that I, like a wave, wash away and then, come to another identity. And we're really just one being that, so this thing disappears and just has plays as a song and disappears. I think that our identity, so differing from Buddhism and Hinduism thought that I've come across, I think that identity persists eternally.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, you mentioned the Trinity, and some people talk about a quaternity, but you've got an infinity.
That's right. Yes.
Right?
That's right. Yes.
And is it a numerical infinity, or is it just a really big number of beings?
I think
An
it's
actual infinity? An actual
actual
infinity?
infinity. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people to meet.
And I think that's what, even like stepping back and thinking of existence as a whole and why there is no beginning and there is no end. Because if you were to look at any particular subset of time and space, there's only a finite number of configurations that can exist within that
Yeah.
subset.
Yeah.
And so, if we're going to be living in heaven forever, if you start really thinking of forever, you're like, okay, eventually this has to, back to kind of the idea of Nietzsche, like have
Eternal
this idea
return.
of eternal recurrence, right? Um, and that's going to exist. But one thing that makes that still interesting is if there are an infinite number of beings, then, from an eternity backwards or forwards, basically that completeness is that you get to live out everything with everyone.
Mm. Yeah. So how would you respond to the accusation that you're an atheist, that LDS are atheists?
Atheists, interesting. Um, I guess I don't understand the accusation.
Well, I mean, okay, let me remove you from the picture a little bit.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
What if someone were to have the opinion that pantheists are atheists? Because that's what Spinoza went through. That Spinoza was persecuted by his Jewish congregation because they accused him of atheism because he was a pantheist. So I would say the same thing, and I would say the same thing about the LDS. Like, it's just like if you go that far into, you're basically an atheist. So it's not to disparage you and your worldview, but it's like sort
Hmm.
of just like a way of thinking about it. So I just want to
Yeah.
get your reaction. And maybe if you think about the way the Jews condemned Spinoza, maybe that'll help you distance yourself emotionally from the question.
No, I don't get too attached. I don't mind attacking ideas. I don't take it personally. I'm trying to think. It depends on the time frame that you're looking at, because again, as opposed to thinking of this universal nature, let's just keep it to what I would call one eternity, which I do. That's kind of sounds like a contradiction of terms, but in my own mental thinking, I call an eternity something that's incomprehensibly long, but has a finite beginning and ending. And I think that's what we're currently in. And I think that is operated by one God, at the head of that. And so I do think there's an individual, God the Father, and uniquely, I guess, God the Mother as a pair. um, that are at the head and operating that, and have a son, Christ, that's the savior and mediator of this entire process in this one eternity iteration of eternity.
Oh, just in this one?
Yeah, in this one,
Uh,
and they might continue for many eternities, but how that connects into us and our growth, and where we get involved in that process, because I believe in our eventual progression we would uh, as a family situation, we are like children that over, I think, well, in my own opinion, I would call it like even billions of these eternities. Like it's just becomes astronomically and almost incomprehensibly hard to understand. But where we are in our current state of progression, we would eventually be in a similar state and position as God or Christ. So this is an idea of theosis, or um, like maybe the furthest extent of deification, like literally partaking in the nature and acting as God is acting now, that we will, be in that position.
yeah, well, we often accuse people of playing God, when they try to control everything, and um, the computer technology is a good example of that, where we can create a world and set the rules for the world and make a game, and people play your game, and they're restricted by the constraints of the game. So it's kind of like a fractal image that you've given me now of like gods within gods within gods, like gods within a world. Like I created a world within that world. They're
Yeah,
becoming gods and creating their own worlds and these sorts of things, sort of like a fractal image. It's very
yeah,
interesting. My friend is asking, I want to give a shout out to my friend Trad Man and Christopher Rice. They're in the live chat here. But my
yeah.
friend Christopher asks about if you're able to mention the name of another god. Like, are you allowed to mention the names of other gods? I'm not sure.
I mean, no, not really, because I mean, it's not that we're not allowed. It's just that I think the thinking hasn't gone that far, and even if it had gone far enough, say it's not our concern. Like it doesn't, like for this time and space now, all that's relevant is that we have, one God. I mean, this is just trying to piece everything together in the infinity. But as far as like practically speaking, we would be talking about God the Father. Joseph Smith said he had a father. So it brings up this idea of kind of fractal, and if you start thinking back, maybe some sort of, um, it might look like a, what do you call it?
Infinite regress, infinite
Infinite.
regress.
Yeah, exactly. That is what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah.
Might look like an infinite regress. Um, but then that ties back into my personal view of how existence is as one infinite collapse of the wave function. And so I see it like, that art image of where the hand is drawing the hand.
Yeah, Escher, yeah. Escher.
Yes. That's how I view all of reality,
Yeah.
is that it's an eternal cycle in some sense, where there is no true beginning and there's no true end. So you can't say our time and space was truly preceded, or everything is now. And so we are just as much the center of the eternity as every other point in that space and time that is infinite.
Yeah, it's interesting because I just reject out of hand the infinite regress, like I reject that philosophically, and that's what leads me to monotheism, basically. I wanted to ask you about cause and effect because
Yeah.
it's a dogma of my Catholic faith that we can know the uncaused first cause through, for example, cause and effect, causality,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Everything has a cause, and so people could ask you like, who caused God the Father? Who created God the Father? What's the source or the reason for God the Father?
Yes.
We
Yes.
say
Yes.
in Catholicism, we say that when the atheist asks us, well, who God created the universe, who created God? We say that God's essence is existence, and his reason for being is not outside of himself, it's within himself. It is intrinsic within him because his essence is existence. That's what we say.
Yep.
But you don't say that. You say there's an infinite regress, or
Yeah. I guess I do agree with the idea that an infinite regress itself is logically impossible. So that's what I think it appears like on first surface level. Um, but I would agree with you, that God is the first cause, and that the, I guess, first action, if you want to put it that way, or the origin, is all within himself. But then I would say what was within himself is all that is, and we are part of that just as much as any other being, including that being that we might look to as God the Father in this, iteration of eternity. But you could also think of God in more of the pantheistic sense, but it's almost like a hybrid of the two, right? It's that God, but everything within him is collapsing into the reality that is, and that reality is infinite time and space.
Yeah, so there's a little gray area here between monotheism and pantheism, and the reason that we monotheists reject pantheism is because of the material and because of cause and effect and because of the perfection of God. God is infinite in every pure perfection. Every perfection that's better to have than not to have. God is infinite in that perfection. And
Yes.
matter is always composite. It's always composite so that it needs a cause to come together. And so it's always changing. And if it's perfect and it changes, it's no longer perfect. And I've asked a couple of LDS about this, but I'm just curious what you would say about that because I reject pantheism. I was a pantheist for a long time as an atheist. And
Mm-hmm.
that's another reason that I'm comfortable accusing pantheists of being atheists because I was a pantheist when I was an atheist,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'm just curious what you would say if I talked about the changeable nature of matter and how it's always composite. At the most fundamental level, matter is composite because it's composed of essence and existence, whereas God isn't composed of essence and existence. He's not composed at all. He's absolutely simple. So, but what would you say from your LDS perspective about pantheism versus uh, God?
Well, first of all, it's difficult as LDS because most LDS people that you speak to are not going to be pantheists.
Right.
So this is jumping a little bit into I guess,
But
my
you
own.
you say that you are, like you just flat out say that you are pantheist,
I,
or you're leaning that way. You have pantheist
I
leanings.
still have a hesitation just because I don't know the particulars of what everybody means when they say pantheist. I do believe that we are all within the divine nature, let's say that. And all of reality itself is part of the divine nature. And I think um, having a figure like Christ and the atonement is necessary for this reality to work because I'd say at the very origin of existence, you have all possibility. And this is what might think of as the wave function. There's all possibility. But the problem is that all possibility includes both things that can work together and coexist, and can also you could conceive of possibilities that are paradoxical with one another and cannot coexist. And so I think when reality or intelligence is able to view the whole simultaneously, you might think of that as the mind of God, and as this wave function collapses, well, we're manifestations of that consciousness and making choices. And sometimes those choices that we make are not compatible with eternal life, or in other words, for all existence to live in harmony. And that fractures reality. And in fact, I think reality itself would cease to exist if there was not something that could repair that paradox that's entered into the system. And so I think that paradox is what we call evil or sin, because it's bringing that which is not iterable across the infinite time and space. In fact, it would destroy it if it became a law unto itself. And so it fractures reality. And I think the purpose of Christ and is to come and descend below all things. Now, most LDS people will subscribe to something more akin to the penal substitution model of the atonement. My personal view, if you're familiar, is probably closer to something like the Christus Victory view. Um, I personally call it the knowledge theory of the atonement. I believe Christ came and descended below all things in order to experience and see the darkness for what it was, and which enabled him to ascend above all things and to be the governor and order of light. And by being the governor and orderer of light, he was then enabled to show us what we could not see on our own in our sinful, paradoxical choices, that he could show us a different way and to escape that and to basically repair reality from that fracture. And so without the atonement, the descension of Christ and ascension and being the governor of the universe, all reality would cease to exist because that paradox would collapse. And so it was the very fundamental foundational thing that allowed reality to actualize and exist eternally the way that it has.
We say that Christ created the universe, because he's God.
Sure.
Do you say that too, or?
Yeah. So, because I guess the LDS Church is not Trinitarian, we see Christ as an actual mediator to the Father as a separate individual being, like you and I are separate individuals, but we still see Christ as the creator. So God the
Okay,
Father essentially giving the commands and his son,
okay, okay,
going out and living out those commands as the creator. Yeah.
okay. I wanted, as you were speaking, it's very interesting speaking with you, by the way, but as you were speaking, I was thinking about one of the ways I categorize people's worldviews. I just ask some very, very fundamental questions. Like,
Sure.
do you think that there is God? Okay, do you think that there is God? Yes or no? Do you think that there is not God? Yes or no? Meaning, like, for example, I would answer the first question, yes, I believe that there is God, and I
Yes.
believe that there is not God. For example, I'm an example of not God. I'm not God. Okay?
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll become God-like, entering into the life of the Trinity. That's the goal. Theosis,
Yeah.
that is the goal. But I'm
Yes.
not God. God is God, I'm not God. So to both questions I say yes. Is there God? Yes. Is there not God? Yes. But some people say, like the pantheists say, is there God? Yes. Is there not God? No. There's not God.
Mm, I see.
So what do you say?
That's I guess where I wouldn't be pantheist then, I guess, because I do agree there is not God.
Ah.
Um,
Ah.
and what not God is in my mind is paradox. It's also what's called nothing in my mind. Nothing.
Yeah,
And
but hold on, before you go on.
yes.
Saint Augustine famously clarified the problem of evil when he identified the fact, the metaphysical fact, that evil has no substance. Evil is not a thing. I can't put evil under a microscope and then try to build an antidote to evil. Evil is a way. So let's say you capture, torture, rape, and murder a child.
Yes.
Everything about that is ontologically good, but you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. You should feed the child, care for the child. But
That's
every
right.
gesture you do, all the power you have, all the pleasure you have in your sick, demented thing you're doing, all of it is good. Okay? All of it is good. Evil has no substance. We can't take any part of that sick perversion and grab a hold of it. It's just a way. It's a misuse of our free will. It's an abuse of free will. So
Yeah.
evil has no substance. So when you say, yes, I believe there's not God, but it has no substance. Yeah, well, so do it's the same thing. Like when it comes to evil and sin, it has no substance. So maybe you are a pantheist because what you're calling not God uh, is just an abuse of free will, right? Do you agree or?
Yeah, it's an abuse of free will, and what what you're saying too also reminds me of Carl Jung and this idea of the shadow, right? This idea that unintegrated parts of ourselves. So I believe that is the source of evil, is fractionated truth, or truth that is misused in ways that are not truthful and therefore paradoxical. And that is what evil is. In some sense, it's not just the absence of something. It's the introduction of this paradox, and actually I think creates a sort of, like, what visually in my mind, it's creating kind of a break in space-time and reality itself. It's doing something functional. So in that sense, I can call it real because it is having an effect on reality, and that you have to do something about it. It has to be that effect has to be repaired. But the ultimate end of evil is that it gets put back to its place, which is separated from the somethingness, the truth, and goes back to nothingness, to darkness, to death, total death.
Yeah. Well, the example that I like to use with evil having no substance, well, you could picture an apple there are a bunch of apples in the bag, but you pick up one of them and it's all mushy and it's like worm eaten and moldy and there's like a half of it's gone. Okay, so you might be tempted to say, well, all that process that we're looking at, it's real. Like the mold is real, the rod is real, it's real stuff. But I would say, no, it's like everything about this worm-eaten apple is good. And I mean, there's a lack of order, there's lack of proportion, and there's a lack of wholesomeness to it. But insofar as it exists, the worm is good, and like the mold is good, everything's good about it. But in God's design, he didn't want thorns and thistles and disease and death, as it says in Genesis. What he wanted, what he created was a good world. And he created
Yeah.
it and he said it's good. He created man on the sixth day and he said it's very good, right?
Yes.
Was it the sixth day that man was created?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Didn't want to mess that one
Yeah. Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a matter of perspective of magnification, because I'm reminded of something I saw with Alan Watts, who was making this same
Mm.
point. And
He's fun to listen to.
yeah, he's very intriguing speaker, and I think he has a lot of really good thoughts.
This is the Zen Buddhist guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think he still considered himself Christian, but he's kind of like,
Oh, really?
yeah, he went to an Anglican school, actually here in Illinois.
Oh,
So he studied theology, but definitely his teachings were all about bringing Buddhist and Eastern thinking to a Christian population. Um, but he pointed out that you know that like our blood and our body, if we look at our microbiome, we're going to see a constant war going on, and we might be tempted to like pick a side. And if we did that and picked a side, then we would destroy the battle and we'd actually kill the overall body. And so the idea was, what might look like conflict on one level, the wars, the problems that we're going through as humans, on maybe a further higher level, I guess less level of magnification, at a higher level, will actually be harmony at a different level. And I think that's what life is. It's not that evil is not real in the sense that evil happens and is doing something, but it is a function of good learning how to organize itself, and that process itself is a harmonious process that is ultimately everything that is, and it's what allows reality to be what it is. Because if there was no discovery process of what was good in contrast to what is not ordered good or evil, this paradox, there would be no life, there would be no existence, there would be no love. All of this relies on the constant dance of discovering what is truth and what is error, what is love and what is hatred. And ultimately, from the highest level perspective, I guess, from the mind of God that's collapsing all of this reality, this is actually one harmonious dance that is the beautiful everything that it is that we are living. And I would say the overall purpose of life is just that, is to experience. The purpose of life is to experience everything that life has to offer, and have joy in it.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I tend to agree with a lot of what you say. And I'm going to ask you another sort of question that's going to reveal something about your worldview. It's,
Sure.
I like to ask this to atheists, is there any difference whatsoever between the best case scenario for a given human being and the worst case scenario for that same given human being?
Mhm.
Ultimately at the end of, when finally, ultimately, is there any difference? So to give you an example of the Catholic answer, the Catholic answer is, yeah, they're very extreme. The worst case scenario is hell. The best case scenario is heaven, right? And
Yes.
as I mentioned, there are grades within heaven and hell. So the very worst case scenario is the bottom of hell, and the very best case scenario is the heights of heaven. So what do you say?
Yeah. I would agree with you. Yes, there's a difference. It's a little bit like the question, though. This gets into, I think, free will, the idea of free will. and how you define free will, because some people might define free will as being able to do something other than what you did. Um, and I would say that that to me is an untenable position of what free will actually is. It's free will is, are you free of external constraints to allow your internal constraints to manifest itself? Um, so if you were to go back with the same parameters of who you were at that moment, and maybe you can exchange the external constraints, and yeah, that might change your choice. But if the external constraints were just the same and the internal constraints were just the same, you're always going to choose what you did. So there is going to be one reality that you manifest. But whether you would say, if somebody else in their level of progression was put in that same scenario, they might have made a better or worse choice that leads them consequentially to a better or worse place. And in LDS theology, we do believe in a hell, despite the degrees of heaven. And I like the idea of degrees of hell. But the ultimate one for us is what we call outer darkness. And that is where Satan and the sons of perdition go. And as is currently revealed in LDS theology, it says we don't know the ultimate fate of the sons of perdition. My personal opinion is that all of us have a universal mind that is. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I forgot to I forgot to fix your thumbnail. Oops. Haley always shows up. Hello, Haley. She showed up and she told me I got the wrong thumbnail for you. So I'm gonna get you to smile on the camera and I'm gonna make your thumbnail now.
Okay.
Sorry. Hey, Haley. Thank you once again for correcting me. So continue where you were giving us good stuff there. Continue, please.
Now, let me see if I can get back in it. Can you give me
Sorry
a
about that.
prompt where I was going?
No, my brain is completely on your thumbnail. We were
Okay.
talking about heaven and hell, the outer darkness.
The outer darkness, right? So I believe the ultimate fate of the sons of perdition is that darkness, like evil demons, right? They cannot live without light, and
Uh-huh.
they're in a process of spiraling,
Away
just
from the
as
light.
evil cannot exist without, right? It's fractionated truth, it's abused truth. But when at the point where they totally extinguish or separate from that light, that's what I think is called the second death. In other words, they go back to nothingness or back to paradox, the paradox world that's separated from truth. And they separate themselves from what I think is the eternal mind. And so I think all individuals at our base reality have all light and truth within us. Sorry, alarm going off. Um, and I think the difference between all of us is that we are at various levels of organization of that light. So in our progression, it's not so much a becoming something of an entirely different nature, so much as a discovery of the fullness of the nature that is within all of us. But when demons become the way that they are, or people go down the path of the demon, they disorganize that light, give life to this paradox, at least temporarily, while it's still able to cling on to some of that light. But ultimately, the furthest extent of that is the separation from the eternal mind, where the light becomes separated from the darkness goes to death, and it gives an opportunity for that eternal mind to then be used by God to, be become part of reality and make its progression once again.
Yeah, thank you for that. And sorry for the interruption. But
No,
I had a picture of my previous guest there as your thumbnail, but now I fixed it. So, it's interesting because, we see God as the source of everything that's good, and obviously, uh, hell is a falling away from that. It's the falling away from everything that's good, the light, the
yes,
love, the truth, the justice. I want to give a shout out once again to Haley. Thank you for that. And to my friend Daniel Drazunovich, he showed up in the live chat. He's wondering if you agree with Dostoevsky that hell is the inability to love. Would you say that's roughly a good way of putting it?
inability to love. Yeah, just let me think about that for 1 second.
And what is the
Um,
definition of love for you? Because for us, it's the willing the good of the other. So I want what's best for you. And St. Augustine famously said that intelligent self-love is wanting for others what you want for yourself, which is to be with God. So that's
Yes.
intelligent self-love, to want to be with God. And so we're supposed to love each other as we love ourselves. So
Yes.
I commend myself to God. So because I do that, and I have to love you as I love myself, I commend you to God. So that's sort of wishing the best. Obviously, that's the best thing we could possibly wish for anyone, and that's why we
Yes.
don't wish hell on anyone, because it's the worst.
Yes.
It's the worst. That's called
And
ill will, right? It's called ill
right.
will. We're forbidden. We're forbidden from ill will.
Right. I agree with that idea exactly. I think of as love as the desire for the good of both self and others in a perfect iterable
Harmony.
harmony.
Harmony. Yeah.
And I think the mistaken people often use the word love for one or the other. You know, self-love becomes so popular, or sometimes people give up themselves for the sake of others and destroy themselves. Neither of those are true love. True love is the iterable in action, the iterable good that can create a sustainable harmony for the best of all people, everybody collectively, including yourself. And love as a feeling is the desire for that, and the desire for that type of life. And so evil, I would say, is fractionated truth, and being fractionated is blind and doesn't understand any longer how to implement love. So in that sense, it is an incapability of love, and I would agree with that. Yes.
So it's been great having you on. I'm gonna have to wrap it up here soon because I promised my wife I'd just do 1 hour. But we could go on for hours and hours and hours and hours. I just want to quickly ask you, what's your intellectual journey been like in terms of reading, studying? I told you that I came to God through studying Western philosophy. Sounds like you've read a bunch of different stuff from different sources. I'm just wondering if that was a project that was willy-nilly, or if you had a focused self-study, or what was the idea?
I think for me, at a very, very young age, I just had an intuitive feeling and understanding of the existence of the divine, and knew that that reality existed. And then I think for my personal journey, it goes back to what I told you, the justice and mercy side of my
Yeah,
parents,
yeah.
trying to reconcile in a total overarching worldview how this really can all work together. And then comes in questions of evolution and free will, and all the questions along that journey. New ones popped up, but it was always about trying to create a reconciled whole that could work together harmoniously, because that's the only thing that truth could be ultimately, is something that is in total harmony with itself. And that was
Amazing. Yeah, it sounds like you put a lot of thought into it, and I admire your intellect and your love for truth, and for your fellow man, obviously, and for God,
yeah.
your conception of God. I do have to admit that your conception of God and ultimate reality is way more attractive to me, way more attractive than any other LDS I've ever met, ever.
Ah,
Way more attractive. This is just my opinion. This is just my opinion, so don't get too big-headed about it. But yeah, it's really exciting. It's very philosophical,
yeah.
and there's a lot more common ground. Okay, there's a lot more common ground with us Catholics for sure, because we have a mystical component to our Catholicism too, and the Jews do too, and the Muslims do too in their own way. But
Right.
I was thinking about the Kabbalah as you were speaking at certain points. I
Mhm.
was thinking about the Jewish Kabbalah. We'll
Yep.
talk about that next time.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, and I have a lot of admiration for Catholic theology, and the good work they're doing in the world as well. So I
Amazing.
appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, so you think you'll have the time and the inclination to come and chat again?
I would love that. Yeah,
Okay,
I would love it.
cool. Great. Amazing. Amazing to meet you. I enroll all my guests in a perpetual mass. You'll be getting a lot of graces from God, whether you like
Perfect.
it or not. And so I just
I
ask
like
you to
it.
pray. I just ask you to pray for me and mine, okay?
I
Has
will.
anyone ever told you that you look like a young Scott Hahn?
I haven't heard that one yet.
No? Who do they
No.
tell you you look like?
Oh, I've gotten different ones ranging from Ethan Hawke to
Oh,
actually Jamie Foxx. somehow.
Okay.
You
Okay.
know,
Okay.
some random ones that have been thrown out through my life. But Scott Hahn, I actually don't know who that is, so I'll have to look that up.
Catholic theologian, convert from Protestantism.
Okay, I will look him up.
Yeah, 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 yeah. You're better looking, but
Oh, thank you.
so very nice to meet you. Pray for me and mine, and hopefully we'll talk soon. My calendar is jammed up till Christmas, but in the new year we'll talk for sure.
Okay, sounds
All
good.
right.
Thanks so much.
God bless you. Nice to meet you.
You too. Okay.
Take good care. Bye bye.